Walter Woon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to the launch of Non-Constituency Members of Parliament. What's next for the scheme? Co-authored or co-edited, I would say, by Loke Hoe Yeong and Yee Jenn Jong. I'm Yu Ling, senior editor at World Scientific, and an honor to be your MC for today. On behalf of the authors and the publisher, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us for the launch of this very interesting book that discusses the origins, impact, and future of a unique political innovation called NCMP scheme. After the launch, there will be a much anticipated fireside chat involving 4 distinguished panelists of all political stripes. We have Inderjit Singh, who will be joining us via Zoom, Leong Mun Wai,
Hi everyone.
Yee Jenn Jong, and Professor Paul Tambyah. Moderated by Ng Wai Mun, they will talk about the evolution of the opposition in Singapore for the past 4 decades and the future trajectory of Singapore's political development. Without further ado, we are delighted to have our guest of honor, Professor Walter Woon, to address us with a keynote speech. Professor Woon served as the 5th Attorney General of Singapore between 2008 and 2010. He was a non-nominated Member of Parliament from 1992 to 1996. Professor Woon has also served as the Ambassador of Singapore to Germany, Greece, the European Union, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and the Vatican. He is currently the Lee Kong Chiang Visiting Professor at the Yong Pang Hao School of Law, Singapore Management University, and is Emeritus Professor of the National University of Singapore. Without further ado, Professor Woon, please.
Thank you very much, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Quite a number of people here, more than I thought would come, but that's good. We all subscribe to a myth, and that is the myth of the people's mandate on the part of the party with the most seats in parliaments. And the reason we buy into this myth is because we think that the only way that you can legitimately elect members of parliament or parliamentarians is by first past the post direct voting. I spent 9 years of my life in Europe, in Germany first, Bonn, then Berlin, and then in Brussels. There are other ways, ladies and gentlemen, to choose parliamentarians. We have the first past the post system, not because it is the best, but because Raffles conned the Sultan of Johor. Well, he didn't con the Sultan of Johor, he conned the Malays into giving us Singapore way back in 1819. By the way, it's the 100th anniversary of the treaty that gave Singapore to the British, and nobody seems to have remembered that for some reason. But anyway, it's historical. We have, sorry, 200, excuse me, 200. Sorry. 200 years ago, we became British. We inherited their constitutional system, and their constitutional system is first past the post. Now, first past the post produces decisive majorities, but it doesn't produce proportional majorities. And this is one of the problems. The thing is that when you have a European type system, whether in Germany or in France or in Belgium, in the Netherlands, the tendency is to have weak coalitions. And sometimes, like the Netherlands, you go for a whole year or more without a government, and nobody notices, frankly, because things just carry on. But British first past the post produces decisive majorities. And we've just seen that happen in the UK. Labour has got 400 plus, 411, 412? 412 seats, gigantic majority. Keir Starmer says they've got the mandate to rule. That majority is deceptive. The Labour Party got 33.7% of the votes. Let's call it 1/3. Participation in the election was 59.9. Let's call it 60%. 1/3 of 60% is 20%. In a room like this with 100 people, if you ask them, how many of you actually voted for Labour? 20 would put up their hands. 80 would not have voted for Labour, yet they have this majority. Now, what relevance does this have to Singapore? The PAP has had a majority since the start, so we've not had the problem. But the problem with first past the post elections is that you have this vast group who are effectively disenfranchised. In England, 80 out of 100 of the electorate did not vote for the current government. England has had a long history. We haven't. This is the problem. In a young country where you've got different streams, different cultures, different religions, that kind of potential fracturing is dangerous. Now, like I said, the PAP has up to now managed to get a majority. But that is not guaranteed for the rest of time. We are heading towards a three-body problem. And a three-body problem, as you know, it's inherently unstable. Right? You have the Workers' Party, and you have other parties nipping at their heels. There is nothing to guarantee that in future you will not find that the winning party only has a plurality of votes, not a majority. For Singapore, this is not good news. It's not good news. We face enormous challenges, not the least of which would be climate change, cybercrime, transnational crime. Singapore's so small, we import everything, including crime. How do we handle these things without at least the majority behind the leadership? And this is the problem. This is why I believe the NCMP scheme is good for us, because it gives a voice to those who did not get past the post. I use in my essay Bavaria as an example. You know, in Germany, when I was in Germany, people called us the Prussians of Asia. It wasn't meant to be a compliment, basically, they're autocratic. But we took it as a compliment, that because the Prussians were efficient. When I was in Munich, I'd say we were the Bavarians of Asia. Very pragmatic, economics focused, cohesive, and they accused the Bavarians, the CSU, the Christliche Sozialistische Union, of being autocratic, just like the PAP. The CSU used to form the government in Bavaria. People in Bavaria have been Bavarians longer than they have been Germans. Long before there was a unified German state in 1871, they were Bavarians. So they've got a national consciousness. The interesting thing about Bavaria is that they've got a mixed system, the German system, which introduced after the Second World War, a mix between first past the post and proportional representation. So you have constituencies, first past the post, but they also have a party list, which means that the parties get representation in the Landrat, the state parliament, according to the proportion of votes. The CSU has won every single seat except one, which went to the Greens. Every single seat, but not a majority of the votes. Yet, you'll find that the second largest party, the SPD, I can't remember the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Anyway, SPD. They've got more seats than the Greens, even though they didn't even win a single mandate. Nobody in Germany or in Bavaria doubts the legitimacy of these people who are in to represent those who did not win first past the post. In fact, it is a strength that these people have behind them the number of voters that they actually have. If the Germans had our system, the federal system would break down completely. It would break down completely because there would be so many different parties. That's what happened before. Too many parties. You may have heard of the Weimar Republic. Too many parties, not enough Democrats. The system broke down. The result was Hitler. Now, I don't think we will have Hitler. I don't think. But the challenges for Singapore are too great for us not to be conscious of the fact that in future we might not have a government with the majority of the people behind them, but we do need the opposition. Right? Now, what would happen in a three-body problem? We could see a situation like in UK, that basically the opposition gets wiped out totally because they split the vote. Without the NCMP system, you would only have PAP members. That's what would happen. I don't think it can't happen. We've seen it happen in the presidential election. You might remember the 4 Tans election, right? Where we had four candidates for president. Dr. Tony Tan became president with just over 1/3. For the record, I voted for Dr. Tony Tan, okay? Don't stone me, all right? 1/3, that's what he got. Yet he got in. The NCMP system in Singapore is important. Don't throw it out. I leave it to the panelists to tell you how the thing actually works, and I'm sure there's a diversity of views. But I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that it is with us to stay. Right? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Woon, for the opening address. I'd like to invite you to take your seat. Moving on, the authors of the book, Hoe Yeong and Yee Jenn Jong, will address the audience. First up, Hoe Yeong has been a prolific author on Singapore politics, including the first wave JPJ, Chiang, and opposition in Singapore, which presents a history of the opposition since 1984. He's currently the head of research at the Trade Association in the City of London. Hoe Yeong, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Yee Jenn. Walter, thanks for your keynote address, and thank you for your contribution of the chapter to the book. Thanks very much. We also want to thank Professor Tommy Koh, who wrote the foreword to the book, who can't be here with us today. So, heeding the time-honored advice of Tommy Koh, I'm going to make 3 points, and to explain why Jenn Jong and I wrote the book. So, number 1, it was to explore the debate on the question, should the NCMP scheme remain or should it be abolished? To its proponents, the schemes would seem to be an extraordinary example of the PAP's generosity to allow best losers in each election to enter parliament. To the cynics of this scheme, it was designed to stave off the challenge to the PAP, and to the candidates, in that it guarantees voters a minimum number of opposition MPs in parliament. Now, this may appear to put me on a collision course with the former Attorney General, but Jenn Jong and I make the case in the book that the time has come to abolish the NCMP scheme, which we say was conceived for 1980s Singapore. And let us explain why. Just one reason, if I may. Amongst many reasons, we believe that the NCMP scheme has put opposition candidates in a catch-22 situation. If they decline an NCMP seat, they have been castigated by the PAP, and we cite some examples in the book. If they accept the seat, they are made to feel that they entered parliament by the grace of the PAP. Though, to be fair, that latter phenomenon has been on the wane ever since the 1990s. But regardless of the PAP's intentions for the scheme, we don't believe that presents the best situation for the larger mission of building trust with the electorate for the government. And trust is so important to any political system and to its success. So we respect Walter Woon enormously, but that's not the point of the book, to have a debate or an argument. Rather, we wanted to engage, through this question, we wanted to engage a range of politicians from all different parties, academics, commentators and observers of Singapore politics, on the central question of political representation in Singapore, which then brings me to my second point. We find ourselves at a time where there's increasing political polarization around the world. And that's very marked in this record year of elections around the world. The most number of people in human history are going to the ballot box this year to choose their government or leader. And that polarization in politics has torn countries apart, literally. This makes it impossible for any dialogue across party lines. It makes it hard to build a common public sphere, which then makes it pointless to talk about democracy even. We hope Singapore never goes down this route. So we believe that this book, Jenn Jong and I have co-edited, is the very first in Singapore, which has brought together PAP and opposition voices in one book. And the panel discussion that you will shortly hear is very much conceived in the same spirit. We may not agree with each other all the time, but let's at least agree to disagree. And my third point, regardless of our own political convictions or inclinations or affiliations, we want to recognize the contributions of this unique group of Singaporeans, 12 Singaporeans, the 12 NCMPs we have had since the scheme was introduced in 1984. As I think Bertha Hansen reminded us in her review of our book earlier this week, the records show that NCMPs are consistently amongst the most hardworking MPs in Parliament. And so I want to acknowledge the NCMPs, past and present, who are with us today in this room. Besides Jenn Jong, we have Gerald, Dennis, and Mun Wai. And Leong. I'm so sorry. Thank you for your service to the nation. So my thanks to the team at World Scientific for supporting this book project. Thank you, Yuling. Thank you, Amy, for behind the scenes. Thank you to all of you for being part of this conversation. And I'll pass over to Jenn Jong.
Thank you, Hoe Yeong. Please take your seat. Next, Jenn Jong, or affectionately known as JJ, wears many hats. He's an author, politician, entrepreneur, and a former NCMP. In fact, he has written the bestseller Journey in Blue, A Peek into the Workers' Party of Singapore, which is also on sale in this bookstore. And also, a book published by World Scientific. So, JJ, please.
Okay, thank you, Yulin. I have to wear many hats because I have not much hair left. Got to cover it. Okay, I joined Yulin and Hoe Yeong to thank everybody here, the former NCMPs and current NCMP, as well as NMPs, as well as Inderjit is on screen. Now, thank you for coming to this very cozy place, and sorry that some of you might have to stand. Actually, this event was not meant to be here today. It was meant to be tomorrow at the National Library. It was actually approved to be that we use this venue that's more than double of this sitting capacity. But less than a month ago, we received an email saying that our application had to be cancelled after they had reviewed the manuscript. We left it as it is, and we decided to use this venue. So it actually was a shock to us planning the event because firstly, it's quite difficult to assemble the panel, get them to agree to the 19th of July, and get everything ready, and to receive email to cancel an event. Especially because our book started off with the purpose of wanting to capture diverse voices from the ruling party, views from as many opposition members as we can, from political observers. And we started the book also deliberately wanting different types of voices to actually write chapters. So we are very glad that Walter wrote the opening chapter. And of course, you can tell that his views are very different from us. We took everything as it is. Then we wanted a journalist to write, and that was also quite hard. We went around searching for ex-journalists who will write, because current ones will be a bit more difficult given their job nature and all that. So to still, to contribute. So yeah, we are very, very thankful that Wai Mun ex-Zaobao journalist has agreed to. So we embarked on this journey to capture as much as different voices as possible, because we believe that as we develop, we should have this ability to discuss and debate, even if our views are different. So, and I thought that a library would have been the best place for that, because it's a place of knowledge and discussion as we want to evolve our the way Singapore should progress. All right, and also that the panelists actually represents the 4 major parties that by vote share in the last general election. So, but anyway, I shall just pass the time now back to Wai Mun to continue with the panel discussions, and yeah, thanks.
Do you want the video to be Sure. Because of the change of dates of the event, we had a pre-recording from Mr. Inderjit Singh prior to this. Is the team ready to?
Okay, let me go and get it. Should I play the recording?
Sure. I think let's do it with Mr. Singh here. We can say the same thing. Yeah. Can we hear Mr. Inderjit? All right, great. So, all right, let's just do it here. And so everyone, hello to everyone gathered at the book bar this afternoon. My name is Wai Mun, one of the contributors to this lovely book and a former political correspondent. And I think when we first started the book project and JJ approached me, I think one thing I already anticipated that there would be a diversity of voices, even the clash. And when JJ was saying that he really wanted someone to approach this, especially when looking at the utility of the scheme for both the opposition and the PAP, which is the ruling party, I think that was where I came in the chapter in this book. And I think in my years of reporting on local politics, I've always found the NCMP scheme quite peculiar and extraordinary, but at the same time, acknowledging what Professor Walter Woon just shared, I think we also around the world do see different innovations when it comes to how we approach parliamentary democracy. The innovation of the NCMP scheme over the past 4 decades has been central in the management of political representation in Singapore. As described by JJ in the book, non-constituency members of parliament by design are both the losing candidates as well as the best scorers. So depending on which perspective you take a look at it, they might seem very different perspectives and shades in the way you look at NCMPs. We are at a point when the scheme has been amended twice to accommodate more NCMPs from the original 6 to the current 12, and to give them voting powers. We had 10 full opposition MPs in Parliament post GE 2020, and I've been asked by JJ and Hoe Yeong to frame today's discussion as one that is broader, looking beyond the scheme to ask what is the future for the opposition in Parliament 40 years down the road since 1984, and also the year when 2 opposition MPs, Mr. J.B. Jeratnam and Mr. Chiam See Tong, were also elected to Parliament. I think it is a tough task, and I'm quite honored that it's been entrusted to me. I know many in the audience who would be excellent if they are just in this seat, also facilitating the discussion. And we also do have a Q&A session later with the panel, so do think about the questions you want to ask. With that, I'd like to quickly introduce the speakers we have today again. We have JJ, former NCMP, on the Workers' Party ticket, and also the co-editor of the book. We have Mr. Leong Mun Wai, now serving his NCMP term with the Progress Singapore Party. We have Mr. Inderjit Singh with us online. He's a 4-term MP for the People's Action Party from 1996 to 2015. And we have Dr. Paul Tambyah, chair of the Singapore Democratic Party. I think the SDP have not had an NCMP in Parliament. When I think I wanted to maybe first direct the question to Mr. Leong Mun Wai first. And I think when the authors and I interviewed you and Hazel for the book last year, what struck me was, I think it's on page 100 of the book, if you all have a copy of the book, and I would encourage you to buy the book, that a proportional representation system would be a better replacement for the NCMP scheme. And I quote, as democracy progresses, the demands of society and voters cannot be met by a first-past-the-post system alone, and we must continue to harness the pros and minimize the cons. I think very broadly, I used to have this perception that in principle, the opposition parties are quite against the NCMP scheme. But working on this book, I seem to think that over the years, or at least what is recorded in this book, is that at least for Mr. Leong yourself, there is kind of like an open attitude towards how the scheme can innovate. And wanted you to respond to this. Tell us a bit more about this idea that you've told the book authors, and also in response to what is happening around in the world, specifically the example that Prof Woon mentioned. Tell us, how do you envision, for example, opposition members in Parliament? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you from Mun Wai to Wai Mun. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the reason why I passed you the mic first.
Yeah. Indeed, it's an honor to talk to so many of our fellow Singaporeans who are so interested in our political development. I'm currently serving as an NCMP. So the NCMP scheme has generated a lot of controversy since its inception. And that is because I think nobody would not agree that it is a good scheme, that if you used it in the form of an affirmative action, not enough opposition in Singapore, so we need to provide a scheme to have more voices in Parliament. I think that is very positive for our political development. And I think subsequently, all those who have accepted the NCMP appointment, even though I think many of them are against it, they have accepted it because they want to do something for Singapore, for the political development of Singapore. Yeah. However, the controversy comes from the fact that many things the PAP government do for us, there is a political motive. Okay. So while they're introducing the scheme, their reasoning is that they are telling Singaporeans that you don't need opposition MPs, you don't need fully elected MPs, because we already provided you with NCMPs. That is something that generated the controversies. And of course, from the opposition camp, we'll be very concerned, because if that message gets through to the Singaporeans, then you will not have real opposition in Parliament, because afterwards we can discuss further. An elected MP and an NCMP, after all, is very different. Okay? So that's one thing to start off by saying, what is the NCMP scheme about? As specifically to Wai Mun's question, the NCMP scheme, you take it from a political development perspective. I think Professor Walter Woon has also spoken on that, and many of you have also noticed, and I think it's very well documented in this fine book written by the authors. We all know that in the world, as part of democratic development, like what Professor have said just now, the problem with the first past the post system is that the minorities, often the minorities are being ignored. But if you want democracy to work, you actually must give more room for the minority voices to be heard. Minority here do not just refer to races. You also have other things like cultures, different cultures. When a society becomes more diverse, you have a lot of cultures developed, other than the traditional races. You have specific issues about immigration, things like that. So all these issues are what we call minority segments, minority groups that can develop, within every country, especially when a country becomes more sophisticated and mature like ours. And there will be more opinions and all that. And all these opinions cannot be just swept away. You must have room for all these opinions, especially when all these opinions have gathered a critical mass, like 10% of the population, 20% of the population is in support of a particular issue. Then that voice must be heard properly. And the pinnacle of democracy of every country is the parliament. So that's why we must have the voice, those voices heard in parliament. Okay, so as a result, then we have to explore what is the systems currently already in place, being practiced by other countries with much success. Their past experience tells us it's successful. And among all these things, I think the proportional representation is the best system. I won't say the best system. I think it's widely practiced, and I think it's very reasonable. And just to jump to the conclusion, one of the things that I want to say today is that if we introduce a proportional representation in Singapore, most likely we can kill two birds with one stone. You don't need a GRC system, right? Because the race issue can be taken care of. Just like what is written in the book, Mauritius used some form of the NCMP system to take care of the racial representation. The other thing you do not need to worry about the minority voices. You can address the minority voices also. Okay, so you kill two birds with one stone. Okay, and I think what I'm hoping is that Hazel and I will be the last NCMP. Quietly in my heart, we are hoping, because I think the current state of political development in Singapore has moved far beyond the time when the NCMP scheme was conceived. Thank you.
I think now I want to turn to Inderjit, who is with us online. I think you would, by my understanding, have a very different view from Mr. Leong, and wanted to ask you about how you've contributed to the book, your views on the NCMP scheme, and also, I think one thing brought up by Professor Walter Woon earlier on, the three-body problem, is something that is pretty interesting for me, whereby this possibility that the winning party gets plurality votes and not a majority vote. Is this something that has been discussed, and what are your personal views on that, and what is happening in different systems around the world? Over to
okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I'm sorry. If it was on 19, I would have joined you, but I've got some visitors in my office, so I could not move. I've lost time. So next is that these are my personal views. I've been out from the active politics for almost 10 years now, so I don't represent the party. So whatever I say are my own views. Now I recorded the thing earlier, but I'll just say it down here. I think the NCMP scheme was was a very useful scheme during the days when it was very difficult for the opposition to get into parliament. And it worked very well actually for both the government ruling party and also the opposition. For the ruling party, one of the problems was, of course, that while there was debate, there were MPs like me who could provide robust debate to the ministers, but we were from the same side. And so, the ministers did not get the kind of debate that you see in other parliament. And so the NCMP scheme, when introduced for the first time, I think J.V. Jarana was the first one, and I was there when he came. And so there was a robust debate. And so there was an opportunity for the ministers to engage. And it's as we know, it's a platform where all Singaporeans listen. So ministers have to give good answers. If not, they would not get the kind of support that they could get if they had good answers. Second is for the opposition, because they could not get elected because of the first past the post scheme. We had some of them, JJ is an example, and many more, those mentioned in the book and here, had an opportunity to get exposure on a national platform. Had they not gotten the exposure, they may not have been elected the next round. So I think for the opposition, it was something very useful too, that the exposure, the opportunity to debate and also to present alternative views was good for the opposition, was good for Parliament and good for Singaporeans, because now we had someone who was willing to provide the alternative views. Whether we are going to face the problem of what some of the other countries are facing today, where the total vote count is a minority, but because of the system we have, you don't have enough of alternative voices getting into parliament. I think we are some way from there, but yes, it can happen, and every party, including the PAP, has to ensure that they bring in the right candidates, they do the right things, the right policies, so that they are going to get elected again. If not, then I think we could see a situation where some party may get more votes but may not get into parliament. In fact, in the last election, the Workers' Party did a good job. They were quite close to getting a majority in every constituency that they competed in. So we are not far from that, but I think there's still some way to go.
Thank you, Inderjit. And just for a bit of perspective, I think when we were working on the research for the book, one thing to note is that none of the past NCMPs who got elected in the they didn't get elected in the constituency that they had originally worked in, be it due to changes to electoral boundaries, or it could be because, I think in what Bertha Hansen has described in her latest review, it could be because of chess pieces being moved around by party leaders as well. We also try to look from a more academic perspective at how, in general, when it comes to elections in a smaller country, for example, if it does, just by purely having a voice in parliament, does it raise, for example, the national profile of the personality, the individual, or the party on from a broader angle? And so just to add a little bit to that discussion, and I want to turn to Dr. Paul Tambyah now. And I think one thing that very interestingly from your own profession, you talked about how the scheme is like a Panadol. And maybe you could tell the audience about that. I wouldn't do it on my own. I mean, using your own words, I think they would want to hear.
Thank you very much. Before I give you the answer about the Panadol, I think some of us don't realize that there was a monumental election on Monday, and that was the election in Rwanda, which is known as the Singapore of Africa. And there were three candidates for president. It was the first time they had the presidential election and the parliamentary election at the same time. And Paul Tambyah won 99.15% of the vote. No polarization there at all. Okay? So I think the very fact that you have elections and you organize the elections according to your rules doesn't mean that everybody has a voice. And I think one of the things that, again, coming from the Singapore Democratic Party, and I kind of expected to say this, is that basically most of our fundamental democratic rights have been taken away. I mean, and in some ways, really interesting ways, the English language has been butchered in the process. So if you were a primary school kid and you insisted to your teacher that an assembly could constitute of one person, you'd end up going to the principal. Okay? But that, unfortunately, is the way the laws of Singapore are structured. And it's gone from bad to worse. Now we have the infamous POPMA laws, which we were told was designed to protect us from religious extremists burning down villages. Instead of which they end up getting us on labor statistics, or under which specific provision of the law a protester is not allowed to send a letter to the Prime Minister. So basically, that is the background for this idea of why I think the NCMP scheme is like a Panadol. There's this meme that goes around in some of the online social media where and I don't think it originated in Singapore, where they said a parliamentary concession is something like when somebody breaks your leg and offers you a wheelchair, then you're expected to feel grateful for that. I think the fundamental thing is to get the guy to stop breaking your leg. You know? And so that's where the Panadol analogy came in. See, I think the NCMP scheme on the surface is a good thing because it gives you the opportunity to get in Parliament, make your voice heard. But it is, in a way, a distraction from the reality, which is that basic fundamental rights have been taken away. And the reason why you can't get in is because the playing field is not level to begin with. So the analogy I use in the book is that if you have a raging bacterial infection and they give you a Panadol, it's not going to cure you. It may make you feel a little bit better for a while. And in fact, the reality is when my patients have raging bacterial infections and the nurse says don't give them a Panadol, otherwise you won't know how high their fever goes. I said, look, I know they have an infection, just give them a Panadol, make them feel a little bit better. But you have to deal with the underlying problem. If they've got an abscess, a bag of pus, you've got to drain it. If they need an antibiotic, give them an antibiotic. So I think this is where we come from. Is the point is that, Panadol is nice, helpful, makes you feel better, but it doesn't address the underlying problem. And I think the reality is that sooner or later, Singaporeans are going to wake up. See? The reason why the opposition couldn't get in the 90s, many years ago, is because there was a monopoly on media and information. But even to this day, we've just heard how hard it was to get a working media person just to take part in a book, which is as fair and even balanced as it could possibly be. And the very fact that the NLP had to cancel the event that was supposed to be held tomorrow is a very sad state of affairs. So that's kind of where I come from. I think it will change because you cannot roll back the tide. And in the interim, we have these intermediate steps. But like Mun Wai, I hope he's the last NCMP.
Thank you, Dr. Paul Tambyah. And I think some of the views that have been shared is very interesting, and we'll probably go back to that later on. And I think for this segment, I really wanted to ask JJ as well. Some people say this book is timely, while others describe it as much overdue. What compelled you to really decide to work on this book? And I know both you and Hoe Yeong in your speeches have talked about how there is quite a definite conclusion from the co-editors. And was there a reason why you strongly felt that you wanted to take this approach and not, shy away from making a stance on it?
Okay, thank you. First, I have to clarify that in writing the book, as well as today, I'm writing in my personal capacity. So, although, my views should be pretty much aligned, but I'm just speaking freely today. What compelled me to write this book? It's the same reason as what compelled me to write Journey in Blue, my first book with World Scientific. It's basically, I feel that stories has to be told, and better from the inside. So when World Scientific approached me and there was already a book on the NMP scheme written by NMPs themselves, and asked me whether I can lead the effort to write a book by NCMPs. I say maybe the approach has to be different because I don't think I can get an NCMP to write a chapter each. Yeah. So we decided to look at it because it's a scheme that there's a lot of debate over that 40 years that's in existence. And in that 40 years that has been in existence, happened to be the 40 years that the opposition also managed to start winning seats properly in general elections, 1984, without fail. And of course, there have been good progress. I'll touch on that later. I just felt, yeah, it's good to capture these voices from participants who are part of the scheme. And so what compelled Hoe Yeong and I to write the conclusions? We had some debate among ourselves. So of course, we have different strong reasons for putting in. We put our reasons in. But for me, I felt that, well, yes, served some usefulness, especially because politics in 1984 is very different from today. Oppositions found it very hard to go in, mainly because there's just too much risk. Good people would tend to shy away, and it's very difficult to, you know, without good people, it's very hard to win elections. So, for me personally, I felt that, yes, come to the tail end of the usefulness. It's time to look beyond, because if we keep relying on a scheme like this, then we're always thinking that there's an insurance, all right? But I feel that it's actually more a training wheel that guided Singapore democracy, and it's time for the training wheels to get off. All right, maybe oppositions might still falter along the way. Maybe you'll end up even at risk of a total wipeout. But I feel that the focus should be how to build democracy that can best represent voices of different people, and not to rely on a scheme like this, which basically props it out. It's a Panadol, but doesn't really look at the main issues. And for me, the main issues is basically the playing field has to be more level, for one. I think if the playing field is more level, I think lots of things can be corrected. And also over the years, you have seen better and better opposition candidates coming in. I think there's to be a breakthrough, and for me personally, I will credit Mr. Loke Hoe Yeong for having engineered that breakthrough, because he has put a more moderate stance and he has managed to attract people in, that he has gone beyond a personality issue. So it's no longer about a person, but it's actually about a team, and that team itself is able to carry on even without the person who initiated that. And I thought that breakthrough was the most difficult thing, and since it has already started, there's some template for others to follow. And so the time is really to look on beyond this, and yeah, hopefully this Mun Wai and Hazel will be the last NCMP. I mean, I was hoping that I would have been the last, but it didn't happen. Of course, there was 2015, that was difficult. Yeah, so I hope I've answered all that.
I guess just one follow-up question for JJ. I mean, you served as an NCMP, and I think one question that the book tries to explore is as how the NCMPs have experienced the scheme. Have they thrived because of the scheme or despite the scheme? And I think for yourself, what is your personal experience when navigating that when you were NCMP? And yeah, maybe answer that.
Okay, as an NCMP, there are two main functions. Of course, one is the parliament part, which is actually no difference from any MP, except the irritating reminder that you have a shorter speaking time than the other opposition MPs by design in the scheme. The other... Sorry?
I'm only paying 1/10 of the price.
Okay, salary actually is less than a 10, I believe. Sorry, it's about 15%, yeah. Okay, it's talking about the salary of NCMP. The allowance is actually 15% of what an MP is. But I'm not looking at that, but I'm just looking at the functions. there's no difference in Parliament, but when it comes to ground activities, that's where I agree with Mr. Lau. There's really a dark-wit thing, because you're trying to plant yourself in to a ground that is floating. And for me, my ground floated away, and so did Feng Shan and this Pongo East. The better performing seats just somehow floats away. So, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is that as an NCMP, you're reminded that you have no constituency. The name itself tells you that this is non-constituency. So you can't do that kind of events, meet people, I tried to apply for permit, or we explored applying for permit to use a park. Of course, it's a political event, you wouldn't have been approved. So it's things like that that is really a handicap as an NCMP. And your question is about, did it improve the profile? Definitely. I mean, Parliament is the important place. So anybody who's in Parliament, you get to show what you're able to stand for, speak, and so on, and people will make the judgment call. And of course, within a party, I would say that it's a good place for them to look at how a person performs. I mean, it's just like a workplace. You put somebody through something, and then you think that this guy can perform, then maybe it's time to move on to a different role. So, yeah, so it's definitely good for raising the profile of a person.
I think one comment you made just now is that we should abolish the NCMP scheme, despite this possibility that the opposition might falter. And I think from Mr. Inderjit Singh, maybe you would want to share about that. But I think in your pre-recording, I remember hearing that you mentioned one example, which is the 2015 general elections, whereby there was seemingly a possibility that the opposition would have no seats at all. And without an NCMP scheme, I think what you were suggesting was that this would have been, a complete different parliament. Would you like to address that? And what are your thoughts about, opposition voices in parliament? And specific to that, do you think this is, how does the scheme works in that way?
Yeah, so 2015 was a special year. I think I was out there, although I did not compete, but I was an election agent for Prime Minister, and I organized it for him in Ang Mo Kio. And we were all surprised ourselves at the outcome, and I think the opposition parties were all worried about whether will any one of them get in. So it's a special year, and that's, I would say, quite some time after the NCMP scheme was put in place, and we almost had a wipeout. Had we not had the NCMP scheme, we could have seen a possibility of no opposition voices in Parliament. I mentioned earlier that I think it has been very useful for all of us, whether it's a ruling party or the opposition or for Singaporeans, to have opposition voices in Parliament. And it's very important for a democracy that's as mature as ours now, that we have robust debates, we have alternative views, suggestions for alternative policies, so that we can do what is right for Singaporeans to improve Singapore and improve life for Singaporeans. So I think, I was worried, all of us worried that we were shocked ourselves from the PAP side that we got such good results. But we knew it was a special year, something happened, and this could happen again in the future. So I think, so leaving it down there does not hurt us. At the same time, we have seen now an era where the opposition has been able to attract very capable and credible candidates like Professor Paul Tambyah, and the rest of them were in Parliament. He looks like a PAP candidate if we had got him into the PAP. So I would say that Workers' Party also has done well in attracting good people. So I think the opposition is today capable of getting into Parliament themselves, but I think we want to keep the NCMP scheme in case we have a special event again, and we would be poorer if, let's say, we don't have, or we have less voices, opposition voices in Parliament, if not many of them get elected. But I said in the recorded interview that I think moving forward, as long as the opposition parties do their part, do their job of attracting qualified, good quality candidates, I think they will give the PAP a run for the money. And the PAP therefore have to keep on improving. And so that, they can win. I mean, every political party's job is to win as many seats as possible, not to let the other party win. So I think everyone has to raise their standards and try to win the seat. So PAP wants to form government, wants to form a supermajority, they have to win. But if let's say, opposition can provide alternative group of people, then they deserve to come in and take more seats.
Thank you. And before we open up to questions from the audience, I think one question for Dr. Tambyah, which is really, you said that I think the stance that you're taking is better than nothing. NCMP scheme is better than nothing. It doesn't seem like an outright objection or abolish the scheme. But at the same time, I think why. I just wanted to understand, why are the opposition parties so unhappy about this machinations of, the PAP to what you described as, to remain in power. And I think the counter question is, if you were in power, for example, surely, you would do the same thing. And I don't know what your response to that would be.
Thanks very much. That point gets made all the time. That if the Workers' Party were in power, then they would make the losing Workers' Party candidate the grassroots advisor. I said, I don't really think so. First of all, I don't think they would be able to get away with it, okay? Because the People's Association and all that would probably not let them do that. Second of all, I think this idea that these are machinations to keep themselves in power, and everyone does that. The reality is you do what you think you can get away with. And we've seen this in the United States, we've seen this all over the world. So it's not just in Rwanda or other countries which are one-party dominant, but even in two-party systems, you see that the ruling party tries to do what they can to remain in power, but they only do what they think they can get away with it. And the fact is that social media has changed the world entirely. People keep asking Sun Juan, how come SDP doesn't do civil disobedience anymore? His answer is we don't need to, because we put up a TikTok. Worst thing, you get kena off mud. But but we have the ability to reach out to far more people than if we were standing on Hong Lim Green or Raffles Place or something like that. So I think that it is a bad thing, it's a machination, but I think the PAP is smart enough to realize that they cannot get away with some of the things they got away with before in this current social media environment.
We're also at a timing whereby Hugh said, everyone is in anticipation of, the next big event, which is when is the next elections coming. And I think when we were speaking to Mr. Leong about the book for PSP, I think one thing we asked about is, I think we take for granted that visibility in Parliament, always has a positive effect. And I think one question we asked the PSP and Mr. Leong and Hazel yourself is, what has your experience been so far in Parliament? Because coming from a different party, I think our past NCMPs have been, for example, from the Workers' Party, and inviting a different dynamics to Parliament, and how not only just the ruling party interacts with PSP and NCMPs, and also including how the Workers' Party members of Parliament interact with you. How has your experience been so far? And do you think, I think that question in one of the chapters is this a boon or bane for you as an individual? I think as a new political actor in Parliament, how does that work for you? And after that, you'll ask if the audience have any questions.
Okay, I mean, like we have said before, the NCMP scheme can be a very good opportunity for the new politicians to come in and learn more about Parliament procedures and all that, and the political maneuvers and all that in Parliament. So I think in terms of personal experience, I think I've gained a lot by being in Parliament. But I think the issue that we are talking about is whatever we do is actually the whole idea or the whole the fact that we are in Parliament is not just for ourselves, you know. It's more for what is the implication and what is the effect of our presence in Parliament on the overall political development in Singapore. So I think we are more focused on that. So with regards to that, of course, like we said this just now, there are a lot of controversies with regards to the NCMP scheme. Okay. Yeah, I think that's what we have so far. Yeah.
And with that, the mic is over to the audience. I think Wally has a question over there.